Welcome everybody to another broadcast of W Experts LLC and WINDEV US PC Soft Products. We will be going through creating RESTful web services and XML services and how they're going to be used or how you can use them with Pete Halstead on WebDev. A couple of announcements before we really get things going here. Appreciate everybody that's given help out there on Google Plus on the news group. That's been great. Keep it up. It's wonderful. Second of all, we have now contracted with the Holiday Inn in West Palm Beach to put on a 3-section training convention. I guess it's a
tech conference.
Tech conference. There we go. Thank you. Tech conference in February. So if it's getting cold or it's going to get cold where you are and you want to have a little bit of a short vacation in sunny West Palm Beach, Florida, come down and join us. We're going to be having a max of 8 to 10 people per section. Each room is for beginners. And people that want to bone up on all of the latest features and functionality with Glenn Rathke, our resident professor in WinDev and WebDev, and myself will be training on web services and mobile in both iOS and Android. So we'll be doing mobile on my class, and Pete will be going through advanced training, moderate to advanced training on WebDev and using the new features that WebDev provides for building websites for different areas as well. So we're going to be posting that all up on a web page, getting it set up with the pricing and what it would be. We've got blocks of rooms for up to 30 people already set aside, so we can get into that. If you're wanting to sign up, just wait a couple days while the website gets up there, and we'll be putting it out on the Google Plus for everybody to get a hold of as well. In the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Pete Halstead. He will be going through his RESTful services. Hope you all enjoy it. If you have any questions, please leave it at the bottom or put it out on the Google Plus forum when we post it, and we'll be happy to answer as many questions as we possibly can. Pete, all yours.
This all sounds really exciting. I can't wait to see that website you're writing for the sign.
Oh, no, it's your job, Bubba. That's why you the web man.
Crap.
I'm the web service man. I don't have to write face code.
All right. So, as Andy said, we're talking about creating web services today, and what we're really going to talk about is RESTful web services. But I figured it was be a good exercise to show you a SOAP web service first, and then we'll create a RESTful web service that's the equivalent of it. First, the cool thing is that coming with version 22, we will be able to create RESTful web services just as easily as we are able to create SOAP web services with WebDev. But that's version 22. If you need to create RESTful web services today, there is a way to do it, and that's what we'll eventually get to here. But first, like I said, I want to go through creating a SOAP web service, because if you're creating web services that you're going to consume yourself, it is very easy because WinDev and WebDev give you all the tools to do it. So it's very easy for you to create and use your own web services as SOAP web services. So that's what we're going to start with, and we're going to create the most useful web service ever. We're going to create a get current price web service for WinDev US so that you can call it with a product code and get the current price of a product. So, if you want to, write a little program that's constantly checking our prices and ordering when the price changes, go for it. I'll give you a hint: the price doesn't change, but you know, whatever makes you happy. But it's a good little sample service that isn't too hard to understand, that'll get us started. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm in WebDev. This is actually the actual WINDEV US website. And since I'm creating a SOAP web service, the first thing I'm going to do is create a new configuration. Now, you know, if you've seen a lot of my stuff, you see that I'm doing a lot of stuff with the multiple configurations. I've really latched on and like developing that way. You can do multiple projects, you can share the analysis and go that route as well. I just like the multiple configuration, but that's really a topic for another webinar. But what I did was I created a new configuration, and this configuration is a web service. I don't know that you can see anything here that really tells you that, but simply new configuration, and then the wizard gives you the options, and web services is what I selected. That's how you create a SOAP web service. So now I've got my configuration. The next step I need to do is create a set of procedures. I need a dedicated set of procedures that is for my web service. And let me switch over to that configuration so that the right stuff is enabled. All right, so here's my group of procedures, which there is only one for my web service. And it'll become evident here shortly why we create a separate set of procedures just for the web service. I need two things. I need a structure that I'm going to return as a result of this web service. So I declared that up in the global section of the set of procedures. And it's pretty simple. I pretty much always include a Boolean that is a yay, nay, you know, it either worked or it didn't. So, I'm calling that success as a Boolean. An error message if it didn't work, so I can tell them why it didn't work. And then whatever we're returning, which in this case, we're going to return product code, product description, and current price. So that's our structure. Next, we're create a procedure, and I'm calling this procedure get current price. It takes one parameter, the product code. The rest of all this code, Andy, can you, do I need to blow up my font some, or?
Yeah, let's roll it up just a little bit.
Yeah, just realized that. How's that?
Much better.
All right, so as you can see, I'm using file manager code here because that's what this project is using, but you could do the exact same thing with H statements. If you're not using file manager code, there's nothing magic about file manager that has anything to do with this. So all I'm doing is I'm taking the product code that was passed in, getting the record. If I got a record, I set success to true. I set the product code, description, and price, and then I return the result. If I didn't find that product code, then I set the success to false, and I set the error message to product code not found and return the result. Pretty simple, straightforward procedure. Nothing too elaborate about it. So that at this point, we have pretty much created our web service, but before we publish it, we should go ahead and test it. And to do that, excuse me, I created another set of procedures, and the reason I did that was I didn't want to mix my, excuse me just a second, guys. I didn't want to mix my test procedures up with the rest of my code, so I created a separate group of procedures for tests, which of course right now I only have one. And all I'm doing is making a call to that procedure, and I'm passing it, in one example, a good product code, and the other example, bad product code. I've got my result defined as an instance of that structure that we declared over in that group of procedures. And if we run this test procedure, we see a good product code, we get a success, no error message, we get the product code, the description, and the price. You guys better jump on that. Order 5 of those today. Papa needs a new pair of shoes. Then if you have a bad product code, you get a success of 0, false, and the error message, product code not found. So our procedure is working. All we need to do now is publish it. Publishing your web service is very similar to publishing a website. In fact, we'll press this button, which says generate web service. If you're on the site configuration, it's deploy website, but means the same thing. And it pops up a wizard. A lot of the screens in the wizard are the same screens you're used to. This first one is specific to web services. Unless you've got some specific reason, you should always select the direct setting of functions option, which, as you see, says recommended. Elements to include. This is just like you have when you're publishing your website. This should pretty much already be populated by default with what you need. The next one is the true key. It's the accessible elements. And the only, what they're asking here is, what do you want to expose as the interface for your web service? What do you want to publish in your WSDL? And that was the reason that we created that separate group of procedures for the web service. So as you see, I've got, the only thing I've got checked is that group of procedures called the web service. And that's the only thing that's going to be exposed and available through the web service, is that procedure and variables that I defined there. Then we get to the actual deployment part of it. Because I am deploying to the same machine that, the same domain that I'm deploying my website on, all of my deployment parameters are the same. The one tip that I just recently figured out, I was having trouble with one of my sites that I've got both a website and a web service on, and we were deploying it, and by default the deployment name is your project name. Well, since we're using the same project, it was using the same deployment name for both the web service and the website, which that creates a shortcut in your virtual host entries of your web server configuration. And depending on whether we publish the web service or the website first, we were getting some odd results. So just a tip, always change your deployment name to be something different than the deployment name of your website. As you see here, that actually was supposed to be WS, but I went through too fast and it wound up being WX. But as long as it's different than your website, you're good to go. So at this point, the rest of these screens are the screens you're used to seeing. They're deploying it up just as when you publish a website. when it's all done, normally when you're publishing a website, you get one URL back, which is the URL to get to the website. When you're publishing a web service, you get two URLs back. An index page, which is kind of a test page, and then the actual WSDL address. The WSDL address is the URL that you need to give someone else that's going to consume your web service, use your web service. So make sure that you keep track of these two URLs, and we'll open those up real quick so you can see what they look like. Let me drag them over here. So here's what the WSDL looks like, and as you can see, it's really just XML. It's, you know, SOAP makes you think that it's something big and fancy, but really it's just a specific XML design for web services is really all it is. And if we pick this thing apart, you see there's the definition of our structure and what type of, they're booleans and strings and decimals. And then if we move on down, here's our actual function, get current price. And I'm not real good at reading this thing, but it tells you that it returns, you know, this is the parameter and that's what it's returning. So and the thing is, you don't need to know how to read this WSDL, because that's the whole point of using SOAP services, is your development environment knows how to use the WSDL. You suck the WSDL in and you've got a group of procedures that are ready to use. And that's the next thing we're going to do, is go create a WINDEV program and actually use this service now. One thing to note, and this is something that Andy's had to remind me on a couple of times, because I keep forgetting it and it bites me. If you're defining your data in your web service, if you declare a date, well, WINDEV dates are really strings. They're, you know, YYY, MMDD, but it puts on the definition in the XML that it's a date type. And then when you try to consume and use that web service on the other side, it winds up complaining if you have a blank date, because there's no, you know, it's not a valid date. And instead of just telling you that, it gives you some crazy error message that has nothing to do with the date variable or anything like that. I can't remember the exact message now, but
doesn't match the XSD description.
Yeah, long and short of it is, if you're consuming your own web services and stuff, define your dates as strings in your return structures, and life will be a lot better for you. So that's the actual WSDL. The other piece of this is they give you a test page, and this will list all of the procedures that you exposed in your web service, which right now we only have one. And if you click on that, you actually get a test page where you can test the thing and actually run it and see the results. So if we put in a product here and click test, you see we get back XML with that result in it. So, you know, that's really all that the SOAP response is. Again, it's just an XML wrapper. Now, if you declare any of your procedures with complex types, a lot of our more complex web services actually have structures as parameters, or even arrays as parameters, and so forth. You'll still see it listed here on your test page, but it won't be a link because there's no way to input the data to test it. So, you'll still see it listed here. And that's why you know, it's handy to create those little test procedures like we did, so that you can test your procedures outside of having to publish it and make a call to it and all of that. So at this point, we've got our web service published. We've got the WSDL, we've seen it work. Now we want to use it in a program. And for that, we're going to make a nice little WINDEV program. And the first thing that you're going to do to use a SOAP service is add it to your project. So you come down here to Web Services and use a web service. And what it's asking for here is the address of the WSDL. And that's why that WSDL address is something you definitely need to keep track of. Anyone that's using your web service, you know, if it's a SOAP web service, that's what they're going to ask for, is the address of the WSDL. So as you see that, oh, it popped up on the other screen, sorry. If I look at the description of this web service, you see that's the WSDL that we just published. Short note here on, you see the prompts for username and password. If you're doing standard web hosting type of security, where you secure the directory where all of these web service files live, so that it requires an authenticated user to log in, this is where you would put that username and password, and that would log them in and let them see the service. Most web services these days don't take that approach. Most of them have taken the approach of some kind of an API key token system, and that becomes a parameter that's passed along with it. Perhaps in the future we'll do another webinar on just the securing your web services and how to do that. The one thing that I can tell you, having used a lot of web services, everyone seems to do it a little different. Some of them are quite complex. I just got through doing some stuff with the Amazon S3, and it probably has one of the most complex token generation authentication schemes that I have ever seen. But since all we're doing here is giving current price, we're not going to secure it or anything. I don't care who requests current price from us. So once we import our web service, we see that it shows us the type that we declared and the procedures we declared. Again, all it did was read the WSDL and get that information out of the WSDL. But as you see, it's that structure and that procedure that we declared in that set of procedures that we exposed. So now to actually make the call, all we do is we need to declare a result set that's that structure. We don't have to create our own structure and do all that, because we actually have the definition already in the web service. In fact, all I do is, if I drag this over and drop it in my code, it did everything for me but name my variable. So that's all there is to get your definition of your structure to return. And then it's just like a procedure call. So, you know, all I'm doing is saying the result is get price, and then we're putting the product code in an edit variable right here. And then we're displaying it. And this code is very similar to the code that we used in our test procedure on the other side. So if we run this thing and put in a valid product code button, and we see the result. So we are now consuming using that web service in WINDEV. So that is all there is to using SOAP services. And like I said, if you're consuming and creating web services just for your own purposes, I'd probably just do them as SOAP services because everything's built in and it's so easy to do in WINDEV and WebDev. A couple of answers to questions that you're about to ask beat you to it. You can create web services in either WINDEV or WebDev. You saw me creating that web service in WebDev, but I could have just as easily created that web service in WINDEV. But to deploy that web service out on the internet on a server, you do have to have a WAS, a web application server license to host that web service and deploy it. Or you can, contract WExperts for your hosting needs as well. Like that plug, Andy? All right, so that is SOAP services. So now we are actually ready to get what you all tuned in for. We're going to deal with RESTful services. I guess I should start by kind of giving some background. Why would we use RESTful services and deploy RESTful services? What's the difference? As you see, SOAP services kind of have a framework, a defined wrapper for the XML and so forth. They're technically or theoretically a little easier to use because they're somewhat self-documenting with the WSDL and so forth. At least you know what all the variable types are and what all the procedure calls are and the parameters of those procedures and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, some of these kids running around out there developing these web services think that that's because they provide you a WSDL, they don't need to provide you with any other documentation. For the love of Pete, if you're developing a web service, provide a little documentation beyond the WSDL. Sometimes it's nice to know what the parameters mean, what the results mean, those sort of things, beyond just names of variables and so forth. The reason the RESTful web services, on the other hand, are really just, to oversimplify it, they're web pages without any formatting. You're calling a web page URL and you're getting back a result. That result just happens to be XML or JSON with no page formatting or anything involved. The advantage to that is there's no framework involved or anything, so any programming language, even Clarion, that can make an HTTP request can use a RESTful web service. Technically, you could use a SOAP web service as well, but if your development environment doesn't have all of the framework for handling the SOAP service and how that XML wrapper is defined and everything, then you're going to have to create all that yourself. So RESTful services are much easier to use, and from that standpoint, if your development environment doesn't natively support SOAP. And in fact, you can even access RESTful services from JavaScript in the browser. So, they're much lower point of entry to use one. There's been a SOAP versus RESTful war going on for a number of years, and it started at one point. It looked like SOAP was the new way, RESTful was on its way out, and everything was going to become SOAP. But that pendulum has kind of changed now, and I've seen a couple of the larger web services that I'm using are actually starting to phase out their SOAP services and are only providing RESTful services now. And the reason why I think that has happened is, they started out being a .NET shop, which was very easy to generate SOAP services, and that's what they generated. Well, as they got larger, they started getting demands from folks developing in environments that couldn't handle SOAP, wanting RESTful services. Well, then they started providing RESTful services. But then it became a burden maintaining both a SOAP and a RESTful web service. So now they've started phasing out their SOAP services. Again, with version 22, we're going to be able to generate RESTful services the same as we do SOAP services. In fact, I'm hoping from the exact same code, we can just say we want it to be REST or we want it to be SOAP, and we can actually provide both, both a SOAP and a RESTful service without having to do any extra work at all to make that happen. I haven't seen the level of detail to say for sure that is or isn't what the case is going to be, but from what I've seen, it looks like that's what it's going to be. So let's flip back over to WebDev and actually create our RESTful web service now. Now, like I said, remember that RESTful web services are really just web pages that that don't have any page formatting or anything on them. So how do we do that in WebDev? Well, first we need to flip back over to our site configuration. Since it's a web page, we're going to publish it with our site. Okay, then we come down to page and we just create a new page, and I created a page called Get Current Price, which is the exact same name as the other the SOAP one we did, so that the URL will be somewhat self-documenting and so forth. I'm going to create another one so that you can see some of these steps. So we're going to create a new page, and we'll just call this test. We're going to use simple layout because, again, layout doesn't matter. I think it's struggling to get to my SCM. All right, so we're just going to call this test, just so you can see these steps. The next thing we need to do is we need to make this an AWP page. By their very nature, web services are connectionless, meaning it's a call, you get a result, there is no maintaining of context or anything like that. So even though we're turning on AWP, it's not like we have to manage context or anything like what we would if we were developing a web application in AWP. So we turn on AWP. Now, the trick, the magic of this whole thing is what we're getting to now. But in order to know how this goes together, you have to know how WebDev creates your pages. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to recompile everything. And the reason we're doing that is so WebDev generates two pieces for your AWP page, a HTML file and an AWP page. The HTML file, when you look at it, it's got placeholders that the AWP page replaces those placeholders with actual content and so forth. And if we come over now and go into our project folder, and in this US folder, we'll see there is a test.html page. Let me open that with Note++. All right, so this is the test.html page. First, I should make note, don't get confused that there's two US folders. And if you're, developing with UK as your primary language, there will be a UK folder or an FR folder. If you're doing French, whatever, there's a folder for each language. So we're looking in the US folder. But there's this US folder here is right underneath your project root folder. Don't confuse this with the one that's under your project_web folder. There's a US folder there, but that has the resources and the CSSs and the images and all of that. The one we're looking at isn't published up on the web. It's declared right underneath your project root. So as we look at this HTML file, we see these placeholders, and what AWP is doing is replacing these placeholders with actual content. Well, we're going to take advantage of those placeholders. And the first thing we do is we come over to our page, go back into description, come to advanced, and we turn on don't generate the HTML file anymore. So now we've just told WebDev, don't mess with that HTML file. Don't regenerate it anytime the page changes or you recompile or anything like that. Now we can come over into this file and we edit it. And we remove everything except for that one placeholder. And if you can read French or you do a lot of guesswork, I'll let you figure out which one I did. That is the my page ... HTML header property. So now the only thing that's going to get rendered in our page is whatever we put in the HTML header. And we don't have to worry about this ever getting overridden because we turned that setting on that says don't regenerate the HTML. So that, now we'll go over and look at my actual page. Go ahead and delete the test one again. All right, so if we look at this page, I did the exact same thing with the HTML file. I changed it so that the only thing there was the content header. And I've got some advanced stuff in here we're going to look at shortly, but the key to this is we get the page parameter called product code, because when people are calling RESTful services, they're using URL parameters. And what that looks like, get one for you here. That looks like this. You have your page URL, and then you have question mark, product code equals, and then the product code. So if we look at what I'm doing is I'm setting product code equal to whatever parameter you pass in there. We'll look at this JSON XML stuff in a moment. Right now, we're going to look at the XML output. All right, so the rest of this is very similar to what we did with the other, with the SOAP web service. I'll get my product code. If I get a result, if I find that product code, I return the information. Otherwise, I return a false and an error code. Now, the difference here is I'm doing an XML result instead of a structure. And this is one of the things that we figured out this morning is you have to have a root node. So that's why I have .result and then .success. Originally, I did just .success, and it didn't like that when it was trying to suck out the XML on the other side. XML always wants a wrapper tag as the root node, and that's what result is. So PCSoft makes it very easy for us to work with XML documents. All I do is declare an XML document right here, and then anything I put in this dot syntax will become XML nested as XML on the other end. So all I do is say, result.success equals true, product code equals that. Then XML build string is what turns that XML document variable into a string of formatted XML. And then I'm setting the mypage.html header and XML, which remember we said, we edited that HTML file so that the only thing that was being rendered is the HTML header. So now if we run that page, one of these links is it. If we view the source, we see that that's exactly what happened. We got XML returned to us. And it's formatted exactly like what you saw over there. We have this, let me copy this real quick and I'll put it in Note++ so that you can see it formatted. Okay. Only I could master the art of copy and paste, apparently. So there's our resulting XML. So that's what our page returned when we called it with that parameter. This is exactly what someone using a RESTful web service would be expecting, is something formatted like this. So now we have our RESTful web service. To deploy it, it's literally, we're just deploying it as a page of our website. So we just deploy our site and then it's up there and running. Now to consume a RESTful web service, all we do is we use the HTTP request. We give it the URL and then the response comes back. The .content has our XML in it. So we break up the XML. This is just a reverse of what we're doing on the other side. Again, PCSoft makes it very easy for us to work with XML, and then we're displaying our results. So we can test using it by running it in a product code, making our call, and we see we get our result. So now we're seeing a RESTful service and a SOAP service, both providing the exact same result. It's just whichever format you want to use. Now, the last piece of this is I always try to include a little bonus material. The one thing you'll find when you start dealing with people that do a lot with RESTful services is they prefer JSON, not XML. JSON is native to the browsers. Most browsers can parse and edit JSON, and there's functions for doing that. So JSON is a little more the standard for RESTful services than XML. Your nicer web services give you the option of getting your format back as either XML or JSON. And that's what I've done with this web service. So what I did was I added a second parameter called output format. And if it's not set to JSON, I assume we're going to do XML. That's the only two choices we're giving them. So, you know, if they didn't include the parameter, it's going to become XML. If you set it to JSON, you're going to get JSON back. Now, the last couple of releases, PCSoft did a lot of work with JSON and has gotten JSON to be fairly easy to work with. And we'll look at that. So what I do is I declare a variant, and then you see I'm using that variant with that same dot syntax, just like I did with XML. And then the last thing I do is I've got a string variable, and I say variant to JSON. So I take that variant that I declared all that in, and by using variant to JSON, I turn that into a JSON string. And then just like we're doing with the XML, we set the header equal to that. So let's look at what that looks like in our call first. So the second parameter of a URL parameter uses an and sign. So we do output format equals JSON. And that is JSON formatted text. Similar to XML, it's just a different format. And I'll put that note ++ and pretty it up so you can see what it looks like. There's your formatted JSON. Again, we have the result wrapper, and then within the result wrapper, we have our 4 fields that we're returning back. You'll notice that you don't have definitions of variable types or anything like that. It's JSON, because it's JavaScript based, is a little pickier as far as keywords and different things like that. You'll recognize the curly bracket syntax from JavaScript. But again, a lot of people using RESTful services are going to want a JSON result. So now our web service is providing them a JSON result. And then we'll come over and look at consuming that JSON result. So again, all we're doing is an HTTP request. We're just adding that extra parameter. And then all we're doing is taking our response and we're declaring a variant and using the opposite. Instead of variant to JSON, we're using JSON the variant of the content. And then we can display the results with the dot syntax, just like we're doing with the XML. So put our product code in. I must have a debug statement in there. And there's our result back. One thing to notice there, let me run this again, remove that breakpoint. in XML, if you reference a element that's not defined, you get null, empty. In JSON, if you reference or technically we're not dealing with JSON now. We're dealing with the variant, but that variant, we're referencing an element that's not defined. Error message. If we come over here and look at our error message, isn't declared. Well, we're seeing a 0. That's one slight difference between the way the JSON, the variant, is handled versus the way our XML is handled. Well, we get a 0 if we try to reference a variable that isn't declared. We can test for null and see whether the element exists or not, but if you're just doing straight coding, you're going to get a 0 instead of an empty string. So just something to be aware of. So there you have it. We created 3 different versions of a web service, both a SOAP and two versions of a RESTful web service, and then used all 3 of them, and took us less than an hour to do that. So once again, it shows you how great and powerful the PCSoft product line is.
Yeah, it's been the XML and web services are quite good tools, especially when you're working in the mobile environment, and that's one of the big things that we're pushing into is the mobile environment. On another note, I did run across a website this morning, quite by accident, that has several web services that is available for everyone to use, and it is www.webservicex.net. I'll post that, or we can post that as part of the deal in here. But it has several business and commerce type web services, standards and lookups data, some graphics and multimedia, some utilities, messaging, and some other stuff in there. And I haven't seen anything that was necessarily that was costing, including a full-blown free SMS service. So I just ran across it this morning looking for stuff, and thought I might share that with everybody since we're talking about web services in either JSON or XML this morning as well. Other than that, I think that's about all we got in there, right, Pete?
Yep.
Okay.
I think that covered quite a bit.
Okay. Don't forget.
I'll have a blog article
yeah.
Posted that goes along with the webinar here shortly.
Yeah. Pete will have his blog article out there, which is probably more intensive than what I would put up, which is fine. And number 2, don't forget that Pete's going to build the web page for everybody to sign up for February, and I specify Pete so that way he doesn't try to weasel out of it. And we'll get that started and announced, and everybody can start getting signed up for it so they can do the things. During the period of time, this is about 12 weeks away, 11 or 12 weeks away, we'll be posting what you will be learning in that as well, what sections you'll be learning, what you can do, things like that. Additionally, next month, we're going to tap our resident professor for some new features and training on 21, so he can take a look at a few things there and tell everybody how you use them.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you that date in just a second here. December 16th.
December the 16th will be it, so kind of like a little Christmas deal. And then we'll discuss at that time what we're going to do in January. But I'm looking at actually converting one of the LSTs to English for mobile and teaching that for January. So we'll see which one we get into. But we've got 2 LSTs here that are in French, and we're going to be translating the code to English and, showing you how it works. So other than that, all I can say is y'all be good or be good at it. Thanks for joining us this morning. Hope you learned something. There will be some time over the holidays that we will be reorganizing the YouTube site to make it a little bit easier to float around through all of these webinars to know what's beginners, advanced, and different sections. So they use labels to do that, and I've been working on a methodology to do that. So that'll happen over the holidays. So you'll see some changes in this as well. Again, thanks for being here. Appreciate everybody. Talk to you soon.